right. So today I want to share a conversation that I recently had with Sam Roth. So Sam has a YouTube channel where he talks about initially, I think, meditation, awakening, but nowadays a lot of his focus is on embodiment and integration of all of the emotional and trauma material that can come to the surface throughout this process. So Sam works one-on-one with people doing somatic inquiry, and just based on our conversation, Sam has a real open heart and a willingness to hold space for what somebody needs to feel into, and to help them kind of explore that and hold space, but at the same time, challenge what needs to be felt. So I will put Sam's links in the description if you want to work with him, if you want to check out his content, his YouTube channel, his website, that will be in the description. And yeah, the conversation, we touched on a little bit of this, a little bit of that, what Sam's up to at the moment, traveling, and a lot of it, the meat of it was around embodiment and the relational aspects of finding expression in the relative and embodying and finding ways to set boundaries and integrate, and not just kind of focus too much on the practice and the inquiry. Like, that's important, but we discuss a lot of the other aspects, which I think is a lot of the challenges that people face. So it was a really enjoyable conversation. Lots of good stuff covered. Yeah, definitely check it out, and hopefully just something can resonate and open something up for yourself. Enjoy. So I'm curious, what do things look like for you now besides the traveling? Like, how is your the energetics of your path unfolding? What are what are your practices, or because I guess there's different ways to talk about this depending on obviously what teachers are helpful for us. But like Angelo talks about the like, for me, currently I'm focusing a lot on the clarifying the non-dual stuff, so like after having done, obviously still emotional work arises here and there. Like it'll feel like things are fine, and then all of a sudden there's something there. But I'm curious how those inquiries, what's your experience currently?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it for me is still about embodiment.
Mm.
I'm sort of in a phase of I'm not really watching any videos or anything like that. I don't really feel in alignment with like telling other people telling me how to practice. I mean, I'm still watching videos that relate to what's happening, so maybe I wouldn't say that, but
Yeah.
uh, um, for me, Kyle, like a lot of my energy previously has been about like, if I were to describe how it feels, it's been like up and out. What are they thinking of me? How can I make them happy?
Mm.
Um, how can I calm the situation down? But now lately it's been about like down and in. So down, like, so
Mm.
often attention is like quite regularly put into the gut.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, I'm incredibly synesthetic. Like I've always been very sensitive. So life has been quite challenging for me in that respect. So I've developed a lot of trauma patterns throughout my life to like shield myself from just feeling the pain
Yeah.
of the world, really.
Yeah.
So lately it looks like attuning attention to a spacious sense of consciousness. You could like,
Mm.
some people call it like the ground of being or awareness.
Yeah.
So just that's just like my baseline orientation now. But now that sort of, I don't know if you relate, but that quality of consciousness begins to interpenetrate sensation as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like everything sort of coalesces into uh like I can feel the quality of consciousness in the sensation itself. So, and because there's still a lot of emotional processing going on, it's for me it's a lot about meeting that emotional content as it arises with like with breath, so breathing into it,
Mm, mm,
and allowing it, like the very like feminine aspect of breathing
mm.
in into the emotion, almost like inflating it and allowing it to be what it is, while being attuned to consciousness,
Yeah.
and doing inquiry where it feels relevant to, around like various like insecurities or pain body activations, and that feels really right for me right now. Like,
Mm,
and also I mentioned like not watching videos, but just focusing on what my deepest truth is in this moment, um not like what the non-dual prescription or something, like okay, now I've realized consciousness or awareness, now I've got to deconstruct the sense fields. Like I went down that, and I've done a lot of that work as well.
yeah.
But what my heart is really inclining toward is like a very deep embodied integration in the world, and these
Mm,
insights, these foundational insights of awareness and stuff, they've been incredibly helpful to like translate that experience as more impersonal. So if the pain body gets activated, it's I know that it's just like conditioning arising as I attune to consciousness.
yeah.
But it's like, yeah, it's way less personal. It's not like a small self trying to fix
Yeah.
a small self. It's like a self with a capital S,
Yeah.
um, welcoming all of experience, if that makes sense. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's, yeah. And I'm also focusing, oh, and I'll let you speak in a sec, but focusing on more like relative needs, like purpose, like life purpose, and
Mm,
how I want to show up in the world,
mm.
because it doesn't feel like I need to avoid that anymore. Like I used to sort of subtly hide from that. Yeah.
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 Yeah. I can relate so much to all of that. Like, I think, yeah, I think I feel like it really resonates with, yeah, my approach at the moment as well. So like um, I guess there's a couple of different points, but specifically what you said at the end there, like for me, a lot more focus on relative integration. And that's what we were talking about earlier. That's what I found Matt's expression very helpful, is like, uh, kind of like you said, like the feeling like for a while, like the need to avoid the relative in that sense and not kind of like pursue your own purpose. Like I hadn't watched that whole video you made, but I saw you kind of touching on this the other day about like the kind of, especially for like young people, men or women. I mean, I can only speak from the perspective of a young man, but that feeling of, awakening is in contradiction to, seeking to have an effect on humanity, or to find like your purpose in the relative. Whereas for me,
Yeah. Yeah.
I've found like that's where my interest, like, it's weird because at the same time it feels like the more I kind of push the limits for myself, like the more I kind of put myself into situations where I feel I'm not quite ready, then things just feel like they accelerate, and it's like my mind can barely keep up with what's going on. It's just like, what the fuck is actually happening? Uh, but at the same time, there's that like strong, that feel, that feeling of truth, like you like stepping into just what feels right, what feels like
Yeah.
the only way forward,
For
really,
you.
for me. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like
Yeah.
I don't even know what that is, but it's just like there's some kind of intuition driving things now. That's what it feels like. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, that intuition is like so valuable, and more like active inquiry into like asking questions into
Mm.
like relaxing consciousness, and then relaxing into consciousness maybe, and then
Yeah.
like keeping attention broad, and then asking really important questions that, um like what am I hiding from, or like
Mm.
what's most important for me to address right now, that's in alignment with my deeper truth, or something like that. And then just listen, not like forcing an answer, but then just like listening,
Yeah.
and waiting for the universe or consciousness to give you an answer, which is confirmed as like a emotional yes.
Yeah.
And even like intellectually, it makes sense. Like not rejecting any thoughts or emotions and stuff. Like I used to like really my practice was for a long time to like de-identify from thoughts. So to like,
Yeah.
oh, that's a thought, like asking a question to consciousness, and then like to even think about like asking a question felt like it was too active of an approach when all of the non-dual speakers were saying like, no, no, just life will take care of itself perfectly.
Yeah.
And that might actually be true. Like I actually don't know, but for me right now, my truth is that like taking a more active approach and addressing these things is like um feels so right to me. It just feels like I'm
Yeah.
not hiding from anything anymore. Like and it's like I've lost that sense of needing to give a fuck about like progressing in the most quickest way possible or something. It's just like I just don't care about that anymore because it
Yeah.
like it'll happen when it's ready. And what's more valuable is connecting to my deepest truth and authenticity that than
Yeah.
like yeah.
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 Yeah. I can totally relate to that. Like, um, yeah, Angelo, a while back, Angelo said something. I spoke with him on one of the double barrels. I think it was like a year ago now, or maybe even more. And, he was like, it sounds like, because I was kind of similar. Like, I feel like our minds can use the kind of talking, like, life will take care of everything, because I've felt that as well. And then that
Mm.
was an avoidance trap. That became an avoidance trap from
Yeah.
doing like that integration that you talk about. Like I could see that in
Yeah.
myself. Like it was like, no, wait,
Yeah.
now I actually need to step into life as much as possible and kind of lose myself in the relative. And I don't want to do that because I'm trying to cling on to this thing that I've got, now this kind of expanded awareness. And I'm afraid of losing that. Like that's what it was. It was like, uh, I didn't want to get lost in the relative because I thought I'd lose that. But it was exactly the work I needed to do because I'd become very comfortable uh, in this non-dual space, and it was like, yeah, it's
Mm.
separate from the relative in the mind. So yeah, Angela actually,
Yeah.
he said something a while back, and it becomes clearer and clearer in my own experience how right that pointing was. He was just like, just maybe the stuff you
Mm.
need to address in the relative, and you can always carry on inquiring. You can always kind of, it may feel
Yeah.
like you're putting this on the back, like the back burner, but maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. It's like in the relative world, it seems like it's on the back burner, but it actually the relative needed to come into the forefront for a bit, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they sort of interpenetrate one another, it feels like as well for me.
Yeah,
Like to even create a separation between that, like inquiry, like non-dual inquiry still arise, even though I guess like more of my energy is like in relative, but it just feels like because that heartfelt connection to my truth is there that
yeah,
like yeah, there's just like a background sense of like yes to experience now when before it felt like I was trying to like grasp to like spontaneity or something. Like it was
yeah,
there was
yeah,
like there was a rigidity to that.
yeah,
That's so cool that you relate. Yeah, I'm sure I get the sense like yeah, there's this it's just like a collective egoic thing that can happen.
yeah.
Um yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah, I agree totally. Like that's why I found it, like when you made that video talking about purpose and stuff. I was like, I think for specifically for like younger people going through this. Like I suppose it's different for people that have already established themselves in the relative, and then like who knows, everybody's paths are different. But I
Yeah.
think a young, like somebody that wakes up at a or whatever gets involved at this at a young point, then can try to use it to kind of like establish identity again, something like that.
Yeah.
That's how
Yeah.
it felt for me. um
Yeah, and it's like it's very justified as well. Like I look at my experience, like I've had it wants that whole complex can feel like really desperate and restless
mm,
and
mm,
helpless, and it's just fucking suffering like a lot. So
mm,
I think for me, like early on, the ethos and the philosophy I was approaching awakening like through
mm,
Vipassana meditation retreats and um self-inquiry was I just want to like penetrate through to something vaster and more expansive so that I can just like let go of this suffering because my pain body's been so active. So
Mm,
I've really been driven to the emotional integration spectrum.
mm,
That feels like a very natural culmination. So that whole complex that wants to like transcend and go beyond
yeah.
is like I get it. Like I freaking get it. Like I don't know if somebody listening to this who relates to this, like and for me, what it would have felt like would be like I could hear something like this if I was still in that paradigm, right? I could hear
Mm,
something like this and I'd be like, man, maybe they're onto something, but like fuck, I don't want to go down that path of like addressing all this stuff because this is too
mm,
much or something. And it creates this like helplessness and restlessness, like I'm doing it wrong. I don't know what I'm I don't know how to approach it. Like, all of my practice be for nothing? So
yeah.
all these things, like they can come up, you know, like
Yeah. Yeah. All
yeah,
that
and
like doubt, that background doubt. Yeah.
mm, that's
Yeah.
why, like, for me at least, and everyone's path's different, but that's probably been the most important transmission is to from people like Angelo is to get like really real with myself. Like, what do I
Mm,
actually want? So like, it questions around like what am I actually trying to get out of this awakening pursuit?
yeah.
Or like, what am I hiding from? Or like, and you can be, you don't have to like, I think you can be like, we're trying to fix out this like colossal problem with ourselves or something. So it can seem so overwhelming. But if you just take like a small thing, like, okay, you know what? Like, I'm actually really terrified of getting a job or something like that. And I'm trying
Yeah.
to like transcend it. So it's like, okay, when you're authentic with yourself, then you just meet that energy full on. You might need some tools or something to meet that skillfully, but
Mm,
just meet it full on and then just be okay, what's the next most practical step I could take in that direction? Like if I were to take one step toward something that I'm hiding from, and you just take it slow, you use breath to breathe into the pain body or something, and then just take that
mm,
next step, that next step, that next, just lean slightly on your edge, like just that little bit over
mm,
the edge of what you're comfortable with without going too far,
yeah.
then it's so manageable and like
Yeah.
you're in the perfect place for like yeah, it's just such a good place to be, even though it feels super restless
Yeah.
and uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yeah. I really like that way you broke that down. Because so yeah, you asked me a little bit earlier what like my background is. So I came
Mm.
into all of this stuff through like chronic illness. So I mean, it's a long story. I
Mm.
won't go into everything now, but it was something. Yeah, like I was really all my identities were basically already dissolving before I even came across awakening because it was just like I got so sick that I was like, I'm not this anymore. I'm not that anymore. I felt like I was losing everything, and
Wow.
yeah, so it was like it was very intense when you identified it as like that small self, but it's like such a when you realize there's something else, it was like half the work was already done, but it was brutal. It was like really intense. Um,
Mm.
it just all feels like
Yeah.
story now, but it's I sometimes forget like all of the different aspects of it. But the reason I brought that up because that approach that you mentioned, it's like that's a lot of the people that I work with that just feel overwhelmed by the challenges of life in the moment. You know, it's just like the health problems
Mm.
and all of that. And the way you mentioned that is it's like a nice two-fold approach where it's like one meeting whatever is coming up right here as it is and like what am I afraid of, you know, like what am I afraid to feel, but then at the same time like I find this is so important is also being willing to take small steps, like not overwhelm yourself, but like
Yeah.
what's like one thing I can do to put a foot in the right direction or to bring myself closer to that edge of the unknown, you know, like closer to
Hmm.
this fear of I don't know what's going to happen if I push on this door a little bit, and that's okay. Like see that fear, feel into it, as you said, like there's different tools that we can use, but then at the same time it's both, you know, it's like we could get stuck in just feeling but never actually kind of taking small steps, and it becomes so
Yeah,
manageable.
exactly. That's so
Yeah.
important to point out. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you can fall into the trap of like doing emotion work in your room for the next 50 years and then
Yeah.
without that exposure or taking that step, like kissing fear, like kissing it.
Yeah.
Because if you're constantly trying to transmute fear as it comes up with all the fancy tools and stuff, that's actually a fear of fear.
Yeah.
You know, you're trying to metabolize it, and I probably still do that to some time. Like it's a very delicate balance
Yeah.
in my experience, but yeah, like if you're transmuting fear to get rid of fear so that you can feel finally okay enough to do it, rather than just like sometimes you can just feel the fear,
Yeah.
like breathe into it and just have this like compassionate orientation. And I love like a there's a really good guy called Chongyan Trumper, I think his name is,
Oh yeah.
and he's famous for his teaching on it's called the Warrior Bodhisattva, and I fucking love that because it's like young men. What
Yeah.
as a young man, I would hear that teaching. I'm like, yeah, I'm a warrior. Like I am. Like I'm breathing into fear, and I'm taking action in very uncomfortable ways. That
Yeah.
really is the path of a warrior, but it's like a compassionate warrior. It's like the
Yeah.
new warrior, right? We don't need like at least if from where I am in Australia and stuff, we don't need to be like fighting in battles anymore, but it's more like
Mm.
leaning on your edge and being fearless with all of the sensory experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And only it's meeting yourself where you're at. Like you don't need to overstretch, like not
Mm.
comparing yourself to anyone. It's like, how can I be my own
Mm.
best friend and warrior today or something, you know, like
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I like what you say about the warrior because I think yeah, either like you could get stuck, just like speaking from my own experience and some of the people I've worked with, like you could get stuck in either side of that, like too much of the warrior side or too much of the just like surrender compassion side. Like, I've seen that it's that
Yeah,
meeting, there's that meeting point where like it's actually really
yeah.
helpful to have that warrior attitude of like wanting to drive deeper into like the forefront of the unknown in your experience. Like where is that edge? And it's like that warrior mindset is really helpful because I often find like when there's difficult stuff coming up, it's such a natural tendency because I've used the compassion work so much, that yeah, just sometimes I feel like I need to shift from one side to the other a little bit. It's like, okay, actually right now a
Mm,
little bit more of
yeah,
a digging is helpful. And then sometimes it's just too overwhelming. And then it's like, okay, then it's just pure love, like pure surrender. Like it's absolutely okay. It's
yeah,
yeah. And it's like once you and it's good what you say. It's like a very personal, like I guess you come to the space, I guess for me, like through playing with it, it's like, okay, this is what works when that's
yeah,
coming up.
yes.
It's very nuanced.
Yeah, exactly. That's why your intuition is the best compass,
Yeah.
right? I was gonna say like, what do you think leads to that? And I think you just said it, and it's like, yeah, you just play. And I think for me, like you have to be on the far end. So like sometimes I think you have to fixate a little bit, then you learn the lessons through that fixation and to like come
Yes.
back and then so it's like this at first, and it starts to get like more like this, and it's super dynamic of what's called for in the moment, and
Yeah.
very seamless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I that like applies. I keep coming back to that, like as I talk about this more and just like keep refining my own um understanding of it or whatever. It's exactly that. It's like there's so many bouncing between fixation. It's like, and especially I've noticed in myself, whenever I come out of one fixation, there's a bounce back across to the like opposite end, like the complete other fixation. And then, but as you said, it
Mm.
becomes like more dynamic and more, uh, it always just comes back to like the balance in between the two. But
Yeah.
I would never be willing to let go of each of those fixations unless I bounced into the extremes of them. So for me,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, those extremes are such powerful lessons because you just see like, no, this isn't working. Like I'm too much on this one end of the spectrum. And then, okay, it's
Yeah.
not this end of the spectrum either. It's kind of where those meet, but it's very much experience. Yeah, like all of this.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. One,
And
yeah, go.
I was gonna say a really good tool I found for that is to really broaden your capacity to be with sensation
Mm,
so that it's not scary. Like the most uncomfortable, squirmy, resistance ridden feeling is it's so quick for the mind to like on ramp itself into a story or a narrative about it. But if you keep
Yeah.
bringing attention back into the like sensation itself, like the resistance, and like I think Josh Putnam said, it's a really helpful thing from him that I found is especially with people with like trauma
Mm.
is that compassionate orientation to it, but then just to breathe life into the most uncomfortable sensation, then you can really be with anything. But the tendency will be to really want to pull you into the mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even that can be, that's okay too. Like that's where that real dynamicness can come in. Like sometimes it's like you can be with a oh, I found I can be with a sensation like that. And then the story just is going crazy. So it's like, okay, I'll let attention go into that. It's like, oh, yeah, blah blah blah. I'm not good enough or whatever. It's like,
Mm.
whoa, and then attention back into the body, and then it's like, woo, back and forth,
Yeah.
like ebb and flow, dancing, and it just feels like relaxing behind that is this beautiful conscious awareness presence. So it can hold it all, you
Yeah.
know.
That's
So yeah,
it's so key. I completely agree with that. And it's like for me, that was so important was to understand that like it can all be held at the same time. Like because otherwise people get
mm,
like stuck going back to what you're saying earlier, like the fear of fear or the resistance of resistance. It's like I often share with people because again a lot of people are dealing with like really intense physical stuff that I work with, like symptoms and like really a lot of nervous system stuff. It's all related. Like everybody just has a different, I guess, level of it, and I think a different
yeah,
perspective of it depending on what your background is. For some people, maybe you start with awakening and then it's all clear that it's energetic, or maybe you start from a health perspective and then it's all nervous system, and they're kind of related. Um,
mm,
but
yeah,
but like you said, that for me, realizing that you can hold the really intense physical experience, and at the same time that awareness is capable of holding the part of ourselves that are saying no, like this is terrible, I can't do this is too much, like all those doubts and those fears that are saying, like you said, like widening your bandwidth of what you're able to experience. It's like you can actually
yeah,
experience that even while the mind is going crazy. The mind is like, this is too
yeah,
much,
yeah,
I'm not going to make it out of here. And it's like, okay, that's relevant, that's innocent, that's the
yeah.
mind. But at the same time, I
Hmm.
can hold space for the experience as well. And it's like,
Yeah, yeah,
it's difficult at first for sure, but it really does become easier and more like natural, I suppose. It's just like you can just drop back into kind of the allowance of everything.
yeah. Because sometimes you can have like an agenda of, oh, this teacher
Mm,
said this, so I have to practice like this, and it creates this rigidity. But
yeah.
through that process of trial and error of like going through the extremes and also add trusting yourself, what's needed in the moment, then you sort of like find your groove to be able to flow through whatever's needed in the moment.
Yeah.
And I also want to point out that that capacity to do that is, I think that's really powerful leadership. First, you do it for yourself, but then that capacity to know your true nature as a wake space and to have all of this happening is like, you could say that a wake space is like the masculine quality, right? And that capacity to really know that at an embodied level, and then to have all these things coming up, like, oh, these like thoughts and like pain, like sensations, these like very feminine aspects.
Mm,
It's like that shows up in every facet of the world, right? That shows up in business, that
mm,
shows up in relationships with your partner. I think at first what I noticed for me is that there's a very internal pull to focus, almost like meditating on consciousness or something, and the energy and like still being aware of all these phenomena that are arising, but the
mm,
energy was still sort of like almost, it felt like there was like a bubble around Sam that like I'm oriented inward, like the arrow's pointed inward at all of experience. But
yeah.
what's been really cool with like travel and just being in the relative world and being in relationships is that arrow can simultaneously be inward, but it's also like quote unquote outward as well. So it's like and
Mm,
energetically for me, that feels like it's okay. So I'm looking at my partner, for instance, and she's
mm,
really triggered. Something really deep's coming up for her. okay, I'm sensitive now as well. I can feel her pain body. So I'm breathing into that as well. I'm able to hold that through consciousness. And separation starts to break down with that too, as well, right?
Mm,
And then, okay, then I can breathe into that pain. And then I can also trust my instinct in the moment to know what's needed in that moment, like very spontaneously, like a martial
yeah,
artist fighting, right? Like a
yeah,
pro martial artist isn't like thinking about, okay,
yeah,
got to use the mind here to like, okay, chop his arm because his arm's in this position or something. It's like it's a felt embodied experience of what's needed in the moment.
yeah,
And yeah, so that gift of like what you do when you cultivate those capacities to be so fully with all of experience, which may be inward at first, is
mm,
then that starts to go outward. So then like you can lead in like group situations because you're feeling the whole environment while still staying connected to your like Shiva
yeah,
consciousness, like masculine quality as well, and
yeah,
trusting that natural impulse to emerge. And that's just like such a gift, man.
yeah.
That's like masculine leaders. I'm speaking more for the masculine or people here. Just use a term like it's just a helpful term.
Mm,
But you know, females can have that energy too. But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. That's a. I like that.
yeah,
I like that point though, because it's so true. It's like you don't realize it when you're originally doing this work, how it carries over into everything else, and then when you're faced with the dynamic, challenging external situation, it's like these kind of things just naturally come to your aid. It's like the ability to just
mm,
kind of feel into the situation and like respond with either compassion and just like holding space, or maybe with kind of setting a boundary or something like that. But I've
yeah,
like
yeah,
from my own experience and relating to what you're saying, like that only comes from, or I mean, I'm sure there's different ways to get to it, but that really is cultivated inwardly first. It's like the ability to be with your own
mm,
fear, to be with your own everything, like your own traumas and everything. And specifically, I guess we could probably both relate to this, since you also do like one-on-one work with people. Like it's so essential to be able to work with somebody else with this, that you've cultivated that space for yourself already, because then when somebody else is like in helplessness, or kind of, yeah, just like no idea what to do, it's like you can actually, it's okay to be in that with them. But if like
yeah,
if
yeah,
we haven't explored that territory ourselves, then it's going to trigger us as much as it's triggering them, and then it's like not really helpful.
yeah. I love. I watched a TED talk by a guy called Eldra Jackson. And
Oh
he
yeah,
he was in the documentary called The Work.
yeah,
Yeah. Don't know if you've seen it, but it's an amazing documentary for people doing emotion work. But he's like, he said something in that. Oh no, I think it was like a podcast he did with somebody, and he's like, if you haven't willingly put the dirty nappy of like shame back on and like felt shame fully again, and you can't feel that
yeah,
um with an open heart, you know, it's very difficult to show somebody that they can be with that in their own experience when you're struggling to
mm,
be with it when you're facilitating them as well.
mm,
And it's also like another analogy I heard is dim sim from a guy called Richmond Heath, and it's danger in
mm,
me,
mm.
safety in me, and the more that you have safety in you by broadening your capacity to be with whatever's instance arising in your experience, the more that the client will feel safer, you know,
Yeah,
like significantly safer to come out and just express that willingly. It's just like a subliminally communicated energetic thing
yeah, yeah,
that
exactly.
emerges, and extrapolating that to daily life, it's the same thing with like your partners or
Yeah,
people you encounter on the street. Like maybe you've experienced this, car, where you're just like with people and you just open, you're conscious, and then they just all of a sudden they start telling you their life story, you know, and it's like
yeah,
it's because you have that safe energy that it is
yeah,
like. And then I've had moments with people where like I'm talking with them like that, and then they just start unraveling their whole life story, and then they're like and then they just like it's almost like their mind comes back online
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they like dissociate a little bit and they're like, whoa, what am I saying? Like, what the fuck? Like, I
yeah,
just told you like my most personal thing. Like, I haven't told anyone. You know, it's like,
yeah,
yeah. So
yeah. It's so
it's like I just want
funny.
to give them a hug when that happens. It's so good.
Yeah, exactly. I've had that exact situation, and it's like the mind suddenly
Yeah,
is
yeah,
like, no, wait, we've been too vulnerable. It's like, what's going on here?
yeah,
I've been pulled into
yeah,
something, and it's funny. It's exactly that. Like, and it was kind of weird for me at first because I didn't even realize I was doing anything. Now I've become more kind of conscious of like because sometimes I've heard Angelo speak about this before as well. If like somebody has a lot of deep repressed emotional stuff and you're kind of just this open space, it can start coming up and they can kind of be freaked out about it. And it's like, sometimes I
yeah,
feel like
yeah.
it's
I've heard
better
him talk
to,
about that too. Yeah, I've said
yeah,
that.
like better to stay on especially depending on the setting of the kind of, if it's like a big social group thing. And sometimes I guess that's part of the integration I'm learning for myself is like um, being able to
Yeah, yeah,
kind of hold that space, but in like a skillful way, And for me,
yeah, yeah,
boundaries has been an
yeah,
important part of this as well because after that like first shift, we could call it, occurred for me where um it was just like a massive relief of the suffering and this just kind of flow state for a while. I was just constantly showing up as this space, but for the more integrative aspect for me has been realizing that boundaries. I mean, boundaries always seem so counterintuitive, but I guess it goes back to like what we were saying at the beginning is like uh, being willing to like stand in your own truth and sometimes a more like assertive uh, boundary is necessary, because people will take advantage of that as well.
yeah, yeah.
I've
Exactly.
when you're too open and too compassionate, like people will just suck on that, and
Yeah,
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 it's like and I think
yeah,
it's a very intuitive
yeah. I've learned a
game.
lot
Yeah,
experientially from that lately.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. What's been very helpful for me in that respect is for me, the integration has looked like this. It's like, okay, I've got this open heart now. I'm not going to close that because that just feels too uncomfortable. So there's
mm,
actually a willingness to feel everything. I was actually going to make a video on this because I think it's important. Is there's so much confusion around like how do I set healthy boundaries? And I never heard anyone really speak about it. I've sort of had to like learn it myself.
mm,
I think it comes like it's a multifaceted thing. I think it's a big problem for people who are like awakening and that we want to
yeah,
like seclude ourselves from people and that's fair. Like
yeah,
isolation is probably good because there's a lot of toxicity out there. Like being in nature and these sorts of things are really beneficial.
mm,
Like if I had a preference, I'd rather be in nature rather than being in a group of people at a nightclub or something like
yeah,
10,000 times. Like you
yeah,
could tell me I would do that. It's just more enjoyable because I just feel like the environment now. But
mm,
I think it's like a two-prong approach of like being willing to recognize that sometimes you're feeling things that are unintegrated within yourself when you're with other people and to do your own processing on that emotion.
mm,
But what I've done a lot more processing on my emotional experience through what I facilitate people with, like somatic inquiry and stuff like this, is as that starts to dissolve more, it's is this actually more raw emotion being experienced. And when you have your heart open so fully, like you're so by that I mean like you have an energy line, generally speaking, through the front of your chest, like from your jaw down to your like perineum and your groin region, like the
mm,
pelvic floor. Is like when that starts to tense up in the body, if you're like speaking with someone, I've found like it's really helpful to keep your heart open to it, like breathe into it, use breath,
yeah,
and just keep an open body and while staying grounded in presence.
yeah,
And to really like here's the key is to really fucking trust your deepest instinct in that moment and
yeah,
impulse.
yeah,
Like for me, that's been huge. And that because immediately you know when you need to set a boundary, but
yeah,
then through emotional repression, it's often like you second guess and you
Yeah.
pull back into yourself and you're like, no, 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 like I can hold this. Like I'm the spiritual person or something. Like I can,
Yeah.
but then you just get sucked out of all of your energy, and I just get fucked up from that if I do
Yeah.
that too
Yeah.
much. So what's been really good for me is to drop that spiritual front or whatever I'm trying to do, and then just like actually
Yeah.
attune to just a very authentic, normal, like it's nothing special, but just a normal human expression of like, say somebody's just telling me their life story, just be like, putting my hand on their shoulder and just being like, hey, I'm really grateful that you can share so vulnerably with me. But I need
Mm.
to just take some space for a little bit or something. But trusting the
Mm.
impulse, whatever it looks like, or something
Yeah.
like that. And that the key, I think the trickiest thing is learning to trust that impulse when it
Yeah.
when it arises, and
Yeah.
to not second guess yourself. Yeah.
I love that. That's so I can totally relate to exactly how you said, like that feeling of needing to be the one that holds space, and it's like, and as you
Yeah,
said,
yeah,
you can feel your
yeah,
own boundaries, but I've had it so many times where I just kind of, I give too much, I suppose, um, and you kind of
yeah,
really have to be honest with yourself. I was like, what are my boundaries? And it's challenging at first, like but yeah, you said it so nicely, because that definitely feels like something I can personally, I have been playing that. That's the interesting thing. Like, I guess the more you just expose yourself to difficult relational experiences, it kind of starts to force you to set boundaries. I just found it
yeah,
myself.
yeah, yeah,
Like, I was just like, okay,
yeah,
I'm getting absolutely drained by just giving too much all the time. I just have no choice. And that's for me where the physical body actually always is such a, like, if the mind's not listening, the body will tell you. Like,
yeah,
whenever
yeah,
I struggle to set a boundary myself, my body will set the boundary for me and just be like, hey, look, we're too tired to do this. Um,
yeah,
and it's funny how much that ties into a lot of the areas that I speak about this in, is in chronic illness and chronic fatigue syndrome and all of that. And to be honest, the biggest thing that, obviously every people might disagree with what I'm saying here, but for me, it's all about boundaries. Like, that's what led me into this
Hmm.
really chronically stuck state where my body was just absolutely flawed. And this was before any of the spiritual work, and I had absolutely terrible boundaries. So
Yeah, same, yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
like,
Nice
until,
guy, people pleaser, like don't
yeah,
rock the boat. A lot of that was like for me anger repression, and
yeah,
then thinking that anger was unhealthy to express and all this shit, things I've had to process in myself
yeah,
and continue to do.
yeah. It's very,
Yeah.
it's very interesting. I found, uh, like, that's a conclusion I've come to recently, that anger is probably one of the biggest repressed emotions. Obviously it depends on different personalities, but that, like, sense, it's because you said you're quite sensitive, and I've come to realize that about myself as well. Is I'm like extremely sensitive to other people's energies, and I think the natural trap for people like that is, for myself, I was never an angry guy, but as I did more and more of this work, I was that the reason I was never an angry guy is because I'd learned to repress anger. It was like this belief that I'm not allowed to
Yeah.
feel angry, and once I came into touch with anger, it's such a beautiful emotion. Actually, it's like, it's
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah.
it's like a protector. It's literally, for me, it feels like one of the most, like, self-compassionate emotions, because it's like somebody
Mm.
oversteps your boundaries, and here's this emotion saying, hey, that's not right. And it's like, I don't know, just
Yeah.
learning to feel that is actually really beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's been amazing to like it's actually quite pleasant if you're really conscious and you're really present with it and you allow it
Mm,
fully to be in the body. And then I think people are so afraid of anger because it's big. It's like it
mm,
feels like it could explode, and
yeah.
it might actually do that sometimes when you're first learning to integrate it, right? So it's this like sort of terrifying thing, but then
Yeah.
once it's been experienced, maybe on the meditation cushion a little bit through skillful inquiry to access that place within you. Like some people might like watch a video like this, and if I like said to them like, go, like, how comfortable would you be in expressing anger to your parents?
Mm,
And then they might feel in the body like, oh, like no way, like that's not me, I'm not that person, I'm like that's anger's bad because the Dalai Lama said this and this person said that, so anger's terrible, like fuck that thing off to
Yeah.
oblivion or something. And like, and the frustrating thing as well is like sometimes people might even intellectually know that anger can be good, but then they still, yeah, the commands of the nervous system are like basically when you're in a situation where anger is warranted, they're like it's like don't express that.
Yeah.
You're going to be a monster. Like, and it's
Mm,
like how, I want to express it. So I think like skillful inquiry to get into those places and like undo the hardware is like super valuable, very important for me.
mm.
Um, but yeah, man, just to feel the rawness and to like for me, it's been really cool in like somewhat some places like India. Oh my God, I don't know. Have you been to India?
No, I've only traveled Europe for now. I'd love to go to India though.
So yeah, you said,
Yeah.
dude, like when you're walking down the street, you'll be approached by at least 50 people, like asking you, like, tuk tuk, you want tuk tuk, tuk tuk,
Yeah,
tuk
yeah.
tuk, and you're like, and you say no, 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 and then they're like, oh, please, sir, where are you going? Where are you going? Like, and they just don't stop until you
Yeah.
actually just say no, like no, and actually feel the anger,
Yeah.
you know, and like just be okay with it. And it's like, oh man, and to feel that is just it's just this powerful like when you've never experienced anger and just to feel this like massage through your body of like
Mm,
warmth and power in your nervous system. It just feels like
mm.
power, you know?
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
so many people in the spiritual path are terrified of that. And but
Yeah.
when you have your that power and that capacity to express in that, it you start to respect yourself a lot more. You start to
Mm,
like be able to ground down and like actually just yeah, just be in your power. And it helps with like everything, like business.
yeah.
It's such a beautiful emotion. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing. Set boundaries.
It's
Yeah.
so yeah, it's so true. Like that, like I can just feel into it as you were saying that, like that feeling of being I'm allowed to actually strongly assert a boundary here. Like if somebody like, especially when it's so foreign to us, it's like what the fuck, I'm allowed to do that?
Yeah, I
you
can
know?
actually do that. Like, you
Yeah,
mean
yeah.
what?
It's like
Yeah,
what that,
yeah.
and it is. It's such a like. It feels like a power move because it's like wow, I'm allowed to like
Yeah,
put me first. And specifically as you said
yeah,
in spiritual communities, like it can be so subliminally communicated, and often I don't think it's the intention of the communicator. I mean, who knows what somebody's intentions are, but it's just such a like subliminal thing in non-dual speaking, and that like
yeah,
I think the pointing is important, like of there's no separate self, there's no
yeah.
ego, but then it feels wrong to assert my boundaries. So it's like I think
Mm,
repressed anger, like you said,
yeah,
it's a huge problem in spiritual communities. Actually, it just feels like it's not allowed.
yeah, yeah. And even the world, man, like yeah, even outside
Mm,
of spiritual communities, it's just been such a, I don't know, like that's been my experience. I know like earlier generations and stuff, that's like actually, it's actually the opposite. Like anger is overly expressed.
yeah,
So yeah, it can come out in toxic ways, but man, it feels good to come from more and more from a place of like anger repression to allowing it. And you just feel
yeah,
so much more integrated.
yeah,
And it can be quite intimidating for people. Like I'm sure there's someone who might be listening to this who's like, how would I even begin to approach anger integration, you know? And
mm,
um a really good place to start is like just very simply, you know, like if you had a situation where you felt like you were belittled and you could have set a boundary, come in contact with the sensation in your body, almost like project it as a younger version of yourself, like a child, and just have like a conversation with it as if you're like you're sitting side by side, like closing your eyes, like and just ask questions like what were you trying to do there? And this very scared, innocent child having this compassionate orientation to it, like what was wrong with expressing anger in that moment? And it could be like, oh, I didn't want to be perceived like a monster. So you act almost as if the child is like you're feeling the sensation of this child and letting it
yeah,
speak,
yeah,
and start to sort of just get like turn the lens of attention on these resistance patterns and
yeah,
slowly one by one. And there's more ways to approach it through like more skillful inquiry. Like if I was in session with someone, you can look at different facets of like and access these sorts of like commands in the nervous system that really inhibit that. But
mm,
it's I think it's valuable to do that, and there can be resistance if you're into like non-dual stuff as well. You might hear like teaching
Yeah.
like voices in your head of like pointers from Angelo or like whoever.
Yeah.
Any non-dual teacher, like not Angelo. Angelo is amazing, by the way. I love him so much.
Yeah.
But well, you can co-op, ego co-ops everything.
Well,
It could be like,
yeah.
what? I can't. Yeah, yeah. I shouldn't create mental images like that. That's not non-dual, or I shouldn't like have a
Yeah.
conversation with my younger self because there's no one to heal. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
But that
How's that working out for you?
yeah, exactly. It's like that those modalities can be really useful, specifically with like the and this is what I actually found so helpful with Angelo. Like he for me he pointed that out so clearly at some point. I don't know, I've watched so much of his stuff, but like that the tools that you'll use for the emotion work and the trauma work might seem completely counterintuitive and opposite to like what you're doing when you're pushing for that like first breakthrough in identity or something. And
Yeah.
actually, yeah, one of his conversations, I don't know if you listened to this one with Maggie. I think she was into astrology or something. They had like
Uh, Maggie, I don't think so. She's like a British woman, I think, is she?
no, she's like she actually interviewed Daniel Ingram the other day. That their
Oh,
conversation
no
was
way.
yeah, it was pretty cool. Um she
He
yeah
was
her,
like one of my gateways, by the way, Daniel Ingram. I like
oh
Mastering
yeah.
the Core Teachings of the Buddha was like such a good read back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I for me it was the other way around. Like I got into Daniel's stuff after Angelo's stuff. And then it was such an interesting like
Uh,
trying to integrate the two teachings, you know. It's like
yeah, well, that's awesome.
Daniel's very intellectual and but I love his expression, man. He's just so genuine, you know, like he's
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
so himself in every aspect as well.
Yeah.
Um, but anyways, what I was wanting to say about the interview with Angelo and I think her name's Maggie. She stated that so clearly how she got stuck in the emotion work because you're trying to apply those kind of initial non-dual pointings, which are helpful. Like it's part of what helped that first like breakthrough for me. But then it's like you have to completely let go of all of that. And it's like you said, you almost have to see it for yourself. Like, how's that working out for you? And it will become quite clear, like in the relative and in relationships, that that doesn't work. Like I remember that was a big
Mm,
phase that I went through was like dealing with difficult emotional things coming up around like family. Like I went through a very
mm,
big period of isolation, which led to kind of the big shifts. And then it was like, okay, now life was like, can you do it in the busyness of life? And my initial attempts was like when something a family member was expressing a raw, vulnerable emotion, my mind was like, oh, there's nobody there. This isn't real, you know, like all of pure
yeah, yeah.
avoidance, you know, it was like pure
Yeah.
avoidance. But you had to see, like, I just saw how uncomfortable and contracted I was getting. And then it was like through good pointing from other people and just direct experience, you're just like, wait, like I have to completely let go uh into these spaces. And then like you said, like counterintuitive techniques, and I've used this a lot throughout my path, is talking directly to parts of yourself. It's so powerful because
Yeah.
it
Yeah, it's so
is
simple. Yeah.
it's so simple
So powerful.
and it's exactly what's needed so many times because it is something often repressed from the past, you know. So talking to it
Mm,
like it's an 8-year old child is sometimes exactly what was needed but wasn't available in that period of your life. You know, like when you were a kid and you had
yeah,
to
yeah,
repress your anger, you had to actually do that, probably specifically if it was around an adult or something, but it's still there. So it's also
yeah,
such a power move, going back to what we were saying earlier, is to realize that you don't actually need anybody else to validate your emotion. You know, you when you realize you
yeah,
can take on this role of like coach and like in yourself, you know, there's this healer and thing that needs to be healed, and you can do that work within yourself. It's like, wow, that's beautiful.
yeah, yeah. That is amazing. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a delicate balance, isn't it? Like you totally can do that. You can internalize all the things. So if you get triggered like with anger or something, you could then like process the anger, and that definitely has
Mm.
a place. It's a tricky balance though, because sometimes you do like it is quite. intuitive to express the emotion in the moment as well and just like let
That's
it
true.
out,
Yeah.
like that's what's happening rather than like going into this internal management space where you're then like doing inner dialoguing and stuff.
Mm, mm.
So like I think for me that's again just look like just really trusting the moment. Like your instinct knows what to do, and the more that you just like
Yeah.
you might trip over a couple of times, but the more you build that muscle, it's like okay, yeah. So if something here feels really triggering, like okay, maybe I should just sit with this for a second and breathe into it
Mm,
and give it space. And often then if you give it a bit of space and breathe into it, then it often clarifies the intuition more. It's like you're rather than just like go like the emotion happening, you go into it and then you react. It's like, okay, like the emotion's here, like and they soften into it and like opening up and then considering all like it's and this is all energetically felt and like considering all the things that are going on and like taking into account the situation and that gets quicker and quicker. Then it's like, okay, actually, yeah, I do need to say like, hey, stop that, or like,
yeah.
um, or maybe I need to go in and process a little bit, like
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
No,
yeah,
that's
it's I don't think anyone's like perfect at that, but
yeah.
it's tricky. Yeah,
But it's like you
yeah,
can it's such a good point. I'm really glad you brought that up because that's been part of my kind of uh, realizations over the past couple of months was shifting from purely doing everything internally to realizing how
yeah,
much many of my relationships have actually strengthened and deepened because I felt like I had to do it all on my own. Whereas, like, there's actually emotional support around you, but it's really that balance because it's like like I had something come up the other day, which just like something somebody close to me said was really triggering, and I was like, okay, that's cool. Let's
yeah,
see what is this bringing up, and it was a lot of kind of uh, a feeling of not being like loved, like this real
mm,
something like that, and I could feel it into it, and it was really intense, and it was really like a lot going on. But the more you do this kind of work, you even when it's really intense, you know that it's absolutely okay. There's nothing wrong happening.
yeah,
But at the
yeah,
same time, I couldn't like I had to then bring this into the relationship and actually address the issue because otherwise there was so much separation and distance between me and this other person. It was like you said this and now I'm dealing with it internally, but
yeah,
even if I'm not consciously deciding it, I couldn't be this kind of vulnerable, compassionate space around them because there was this clenching back. And then when I actually was like, okay,
yeah,
I've removed the hotness of the emotion because that was important. Like if I just try to speak to them immediately, it probably would have been a little bit
yeah, yeah,
too
yeah,
heated. And then to be like, okay, let's discuss this. It was actually beautiful in the end. Like it was completely necessary to have clear lines of communication about what was being felt and to open that up for the other person to like give their clear
mm,
lines of communication. So I'm really glad you brought that up because
yeah.
once you get comfortable doing the work on your own, I think it is quite important to use communication and vulnerability to bring that into your relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah, because then and then separation breaks down there too because
Yeah.
it's like an energy when you're with a separate person, it's like energy interrelating with itself that's looking to resolve in love basically.
Mm,
So if you've been like stepped on and you just push that down, then it leaves this like luminous space that could have actually led to a resolution and a deepening of a relationship there.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's unfortunate.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and I think that the thing is it feels so scary. Like I can just like relate into why we don't always do that because vulnerability
Yeah,
is
yeah.
is so terrifying to the mind or the separate individual that when
Yeah.
you consider that like okay, what about being really vulnerable in this close relationship? It's like terrifying. The mind will always be like, no, I'll stay in safety, I'll stay in comfort. But I
Mm.
guess for me, the willingness to step more into this vulnerability came from how suffocating that safety became. It was just like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that
absolutely.
isolation just feels like you just eventually can't do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and there's all sorts of things that come into that, like fear of rejection. I'm
Yeah,
not going to be validated, and like identities can come into that as well. Like
yeah,
the one who holds space you mentioned is one that I've encountered that as well. Yeah, and sometimes after the fact, like second guessing, like, oh, should I have said that? Should I have been that vulnerable?
yeah,
Um, yeah, I guess it's just like the exploration. It's like the journey,
Yeah.
like there's a you can be. I think my opinion is I think you can be too vulnerable. Like you, in a way, like you can
Mm,
overly express your pain body or something to somebody.
yeah.
Um, and I think a lot, and that's and like women as well. I'm not going to marginalize or anything like that, but um, vulnerability become like more accepted culturally.
Mm,
And sometimes we take that to the extreme. Like I've also done, like even on my YouTube channel and stuff, and earlier videos, or even I don't know, maybe it's maybe I'll like look back on this interview and be like, yeah, that or conversation, like man, maybe I was being so much is always changing for me, but
yeah.
the you can be like overly feminine,
Yeah.
overly expression, uh, overly vulnerable, female. It's just like a
Yeah.
way to maybe. But you can also be too stoic and like, oh no, nothing affects me at all.
Yeah.
And like that's like the masculine and the feminine, these like polarities. So again, like what we're talking about, this like this dance dynamically in the middle of what's needed. And sometimes like when you're in that situation, when you're super restless and like you're ultimately really deeply triggered, then yeah, it makes sense to like just like say, hey, like
Yeah.
I didn't like what you said there, or
Yeah.
something like that. And yeah, it comes very natural to start expressing that leap to do it. I think
Yeah. Yeah.
be what may.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's that trust of like you mentioned a couple of times, that just trusting deeply whatever comes up. And again, it's like sure, it's not always going to play out perfectly, but that's exactly how you learn. It's like sometimes like there's a good point about being overly vulnerable. That's
Yeah.
just in my own experience. I found that's often when we're not willing enough to feel into it ourselves, then it's like we try to kind of um, exploit. Like obviously it doesn't feel like this in the moment, but if you reflect back on it, maybe like we're trying to exploit somebody that's open, and exploits a bit of a harsh word maybe, but like somebody that's willing to hear, and then you kind of overly vulnerable, and it's like, wait, that was actually, I should have felt into enough of that myself instead of putting it all into this other person to kind of deal with. Like kind of go back
Mm.
to what we were saying, the experience of being the receiver of that, when someone's just kind of like oversharing, and it's like, yeah, you can realize you can do that yourself
Yeah.
as well. uh that's why
Yeah. Yeah.
it's actually really the topic of boundaries is really enjoyable, being around somebody who has very strong boundaries, because your place immediately. It's like
Mm.
you if
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah.
it's really, and I feel like the more we all work on our own, like do our own inner work and boundaries, it creates more harmonious relationships, because then like you can absolutely be yourself. And
Yeah.
if it's somebody with good boundaries, they'll tell you if you're pushing the boundaries. And I've noticed that myself. Like the more I put boundaries in relationships, it actually allows the other person to be themselves more as well, because they're like, oh, okay, wow, it's quite comfortable to know that the other person has a boundary. It like shows you your place or something.
Yeah. It just shows that you're like it communicates that you're secure within yourself and you know what
Mm,
you need. And people really respect that actually.
yeah,
So like I've been at like men's retreats, for example, and I've just like set a boundary like in a circle of men, and people like often reflect back to me like from direct experience that like yeah, hey, like I really admire how you actually know what you need, and
yeah,
so people really respect it. And I think sometimes the ego just needs to learn that through direct experience, to and just keep like you just have that little bit of courage to
yeah,
trust yourself what you need in the moment. Again, like we trusting your instinct. That's the big thing that I like to help people with as well is
yeah,
coming into contact with what their deepest impulse is
yeah,
and to not second guess it. And you will second guess it if you've never done that before at first, but then as you develop that skill, that muscle more and more, then it's very powerful and grounding,
mm,
empowering, actually helpful for other people as well.
Yeah.
You just have to be willing to make mistakes as well, and that can be pretty terrifying to the spiritual ego, or like any other ego as well that wants to be like perfect and like
Yeah.
spiritually awake or something like that. And yeah, so just take that step, just that little step of like, maybe I can just today, I'm gonna say that if somebody crosses a boundary, I'm just gonna say, hey, excuse me, what you did there upset me, here's why. And that's that. Like, just whatever
Mm.
you can do that is comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It really comes down to that, like that unknown, because yeah, that is so foreign to so many of us, and it is unknown. It's like, because you don't know how somebody's going to take it, but it will take you down the right path in the long run, because if somebody really doesn't like the fact that you're setting boundaries, that's probably a good thing to realize. Like in a
Mm.
relationship, like,
Yeah.
or whatever, if someone is really like doesn't respect that about you, like when you say, hey, like, I actually need to put a boundary here, then it's like, oh, it's actually a good thing to find out, because there was probably like, subtle exploitation going on there, like even if you weren't aware of it. Just um yeah, I,
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people
Yeah.
find themselves in those kind of relationships where you struggle with boundaries, that someone just abuses that, and then you try to set your boundaries and they tell you, no, you're wrong, and then that's, I guess, where people get stuck.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me as well, as you're saying that, what I might have done in that situation is I like set a boundary, and then somebody pushes back, and then previously I might have actually been like, oh shit, like, okay, maybe I'm
Mm,
wrong or something. But so, because I mentioned at the start, like, there's this, for me, like, a lot of the integration is like, there used to be this like up and outward movement, like, how can I make them happy? But now it's
yeah.
like down and in.
Yeah.
So it's like slowing down in those moments and breathing into the sensations and asking a question, like, not so much like, how can I make them happy? Well, that's still an important part to the equation, but if it's
Mm,
been chronically repressed, I'm looking to help everyone else out. What do I actually want from this situation?
yeah. Yeah.
Like, if I respected myself here, how would I orient? Like, if it's with my partner, or if it's with um somebody at a restaurant or something like that, whatever it is, like, what
Mm,
do I want out of this?
yeah.
That's such a key orientation, and energetically actually like shifting attention down into the dantian, like into the gut more, like, and
Mm,
that seems to help ground into your truth more, and using breath,
mm,
rather than, yeah, this like, oh, I gotta help you, I gotta make you happy, and
yeah. Yeah.
it's like up here, and it's like, oh man,
Yeah.
oh, it's so, yeah, it's so uncomfortable to do that now that I
Yeah.
see the contrast. And I didn't realize I was like doing that my whole life.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
brutal.
Yeah, and I like what you say about the kind of energetic aspect of how it feels, because it does, like, I've noticed in myself, whenever I feel like I'm being inauthentic in social situations, or kind of just, it's such an interesting balance for me, because I've learned to go with the flow more, but it's like sometimes you can feel that energetically in yourself, that you're not kind of truly it just doesn't feel comfortable, and it's like you said, it's
Yeah.
much more of an up here feeling, because you're trying to not acknowledge like what's going in the guts, like that kind of feels like where the more authentic feeling is. And it's like, we like with breath as well, like what you said about breathing deeper,
Yeah. Yeah.
whenever I kind of get overextended socially and I go and sit, I can feel like I'm very much breathing up here, and there's a resistance to dropping down, like
Yeah.
lower into the body. And it's like, yeah, that's such a big part of it, the energetics. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
we start to breathe higher and higher, and like more up in the head, and then it's like, whoa, that's why I get so uncomfortable, because I'm really disconnecting myself from what's going down in the rest of the body, or something like that.
Yeah. 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 And that's actually quite a new thing for me too, to notice that, because like, quite
Mm,
like, one of my biggest holding points of tension has been the gut, and it makes a
yeah.
lot of sense because like I'm so disconnected, used to be so disconnected from my truth, and more it's just like, I realize that as you connect to your deepest instinct and your deepest truth, moment to
Yeah.
moment, like ongoing, it seems to revitalize and loosen up that energy in the gut a lot
Yeah.
more. And it may still be there. Like it's not like you're trying to get rid of it. You're still this like allowance of what is, and not like trying to strive too hard to get rid of these sensations or something. But
Mm,
it is really nice just to be in your own frame
mm,
and to
mm,
like it feels much more pleasant, and it feels like you're actually speaking what your truth. It's very easy to go into like people pleasing energies when there's a lot up here and there's a lot of
mm,
numbing out down here.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That gut feeling is very interesting. Like I've also just been like exploring it in myself recently. And if I've always liked to use letting go as like a practice, and it works like it's quite a cool inquiry for me often. It's just like, how can I just let go, and but not even feel like you're holding on to letting go, it's like, just
Mm,
let go so
no
completely.
agenda.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, okay, I'm letting go, and then you can see how I guess it's kind of similar to like shikantaza or natural meditation, and just seeing like how the mind tries to reify it into doing something, and then just see like, where does that go. And it often brings me down into like, wow, like there was so much uh like contraction in the gut, in the groin, in this kind of like lower area. And it's been a very interesting like letting go into that, like at home, but also in dynamic situations. Like, what would it be like to be in touch with those kind of energies while I'm, out in the world? And it's like, ooh, there's like
Mm,
so much. Like,
mm,
I think it ties in a lot with like sexuality actually as well. Like if I
yeah,
I'm still exploring all of that, but I do like that guys like Matt and that, who talk very open about like the sexuality and all that, because that's also chronically repressed in like spiritual circles, and like so much shame and
mm,
guilt and all of that. And
mm,
like seeing sexuality more as a way of moving in the world has been very liberating for me, I would suppose. Is like realizing that we can be in touch with these kind of more um like lower energies, and often for me it just feels like the reason I wouldn't be do that is because like shame or something. It's like it feels too raw, it feels
mm,
too vulnerable. uh but it feels so good when you actually do it. But it's like there's a lot of I don't know, like repression there. And yeah. And like just last thing, like you said earlier, that repression, I like the way you put it, like it becomes like ingrained in the nervous system. It's like, it's one thing to understand
yeah,
repression on an intellectual level, but it's a very different thing to go and unwind, like, or energetically go and unwind all of that kind of blockage that's been built up. Like, it's very natural for it to be challenging, even if we understand it.
yeah,
It's like there can still be a lot
yeah, yeah,
to unwind.
yeah, 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 absolutely. Yeah, like there's some emotions can just feel so icky and so like in a way it's quite nice to be able to meet them full on, like these really deeply
Mm,
like frozen emotions or something, and you finally penetrating them with like deep awareness, and it
mm,
feels like the most uncomfortable thing in the world, that all simultaneously the most amazing thing in the world at the same
yeah,
time. It's like, yeah, and then when you know how to skillfully pull those apart with like inquiry or whatever, it's like, wow, it can take you on this like beautiful journey. And I think it's important to be grounded in awareness when you're doing this. So again, it's not like that sort of like small self trying to fix a small self. It's like there's this
yeah,
awareness. You're aware of your fundamental nature of being as like the basis.
yeah,
So it translates the experience more into an exploration rather than you've got to fix this broken self or something like that out of
yeah,
desperation. It's
yeah,
like, oh, okay, let me understand this. Like, wow, look at this is part of me. This like I've noticed this before. It comes up in this situation, and it's like it's so like I'm so it's so easy to want to avoid. Now I'm gonna like come here, like let me see you. Like
yeah,
what is this?
yeah.
Oh fuck, I'm unlovable. Damn.
Yeah,
You
yeah, exactly. It's like, wow.
know?
And that feeling of like knowing that you can actually go into that like without a fear. I mean, maybe there's still fear, but to be like, it's okay to sit here and like say to myself,
Yeah.
like, I'm unlovable. Like, sure, again, there's nuances and there's times when it can be really overwhelming and stuff. But that's why I like what you said about the cultivating awareness is such
Yeah.
an important starting point, for somebody that's very new to all of this, because that's what then gives you the tools to be able to deal with the really intense stuff. And then you really can get to a space where it's like there can be initially resistance. Like I've noticed that in myself sometimes where like, okay, there's some deep shame coming up, like I'm not good enough. But it just becomes so much like, wow, I can actually just sit in that and
Yeah.
I don't even need to heal it. Like I don't even, because, that can still be like a subtle resistance sneaking in somewhere is like, an agenda around it. And it's like, no, like I can just sit here and whatever it is, I can absolutely just feel it. And then it's like
Yeah.
that real uncomfortable
Yeah.
sensation just becomes so alive. It's like you feel like you're in
Yeah.
touch
Yeah.
with actual life, whereas you were maybe felt so numbed off beforehand. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's really good getting in
Yeah. You're
touch
not
with
hiding
them.
from yourself,
Yeah,
fragmenting yourself.
exactly. But I can totally
Yeah. You're not
relate to,
fragmenting the self anymore. Sorry to cut you off.
yeah, exactly. It's like there's going to be struggle when there's a part of you that you're saying is not allowed. Like there's a part of yourself that you're saying
Mm-hmm.
you are wrong. Of course, that's gonna make life like uncomfortable for you to tell. But it's also very natural. Like I can
Mm.
understand where it comes from and how challenging it feels initially. Like for somebody that's diving into these spaces for the first time, it's scary, it's tough, but it's worth it, I guess. you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Whenever I have a new client for a session who hasn't really done much emotion work, it's always such an amazing thing to like help cultivate the safety that they've never been shown or
Mm.
experienced, that they really can just feel like everything
Mm.
that's coming up, like it's totally fine. But watching how the mind throws up resistance layers initially, like oh, I'm worried what Sam will think of me or something like that.
Yeah.
And I encourage them to actually tell me when that happens, and that sort of stuff. Because it's like, it's
Yeah.
really good because until you address those energetic layers of like, oh, I don't know, I'm worried Sam will judge me or something. And then you acknowledge that. It's like the inner child gets a hug and then it allows that to soften. And then you can go into deeper
Yeah.
places that you may not have ever been into before.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how the ego has so many layers of protection, but it's so when you just slow down and breathe into them and give them a bit of attention through intent, like actually being intentional about that, they're not
Mm.
scary at all. And then that just
Mm.
broadens more and more and more, to where you can take it out into daily life. I'm sure you know that
Mm.
pretty well from what I'm hearing in your experience too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love I love the point you made though about actually saying those things like out loud to the person in front of you. Obviously, yeah, like if you're just doing it with a normal person who knows how they're going to react, but like in a space, like you said, like a client space with somebody that's helping you do emotion work, I've had the same thing where the clients that are the most vulnerable, and like you said, it's an important thing for the facilitator to do is to encourage like the expression of the doubts, of the kind of little
Yeah.
ego thoughts. And it's so helpful because it stops it from being me. Like it stops it from being my thought. Like when somebody is able to say that, like, okay, I'm feeling the guilt or the judgment, like maybe you're judging me, or I'm feeling a little bit of whatever self-consciousness, and then just say, okay, cool, that's a thought. Like what's the next thought? Like what's the next thing that the mind can
Mm,
throw up that would have caught you, but now we're saying it's fine. Like your mind can literally say
yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
wants, and it's like it's a doorway to go deeper because it's no longer something they have to hide. That's what it feels like. Is like in a
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
relational setting, the mind will say like, okay, don't show too much of yourself, and then you'll feel like you need to hide that thought. Whereas like it's such a new experience to be able to relate with another
Yeah.
human being and say, you can say anything, you can say all those thoughts because it's not you. Like it's not
Yeah.
you thinking those thoughts. It's just something coming up from conditioning or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And it really is. Like honestly, it's like passed on trauma, it's things we accrue through
Yeah.
childhood. These are very like innocent expressions of consciousness. So
Yeah.
like that's not even just a healthy way of like a nice way of cushioning it. It truly is like all these things that are arising in experience are just so like impersonal. And
Yeah.
so let's just meet them with open arms and just see, okay, that's where you are. Like come on in, like this, let's have a seat and
Yeah.
let's unpack that. That's fine. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, how do you do that? How do you work encourage that in people you work with? That's awesome that you do that. Have a similar approach to me.
Mm. Yeah, I like that you brought it up. I guess it's interesting. I've like because my work covers a lot of people in different, like some people are not even interested in awakening or like the spiritual stuff at all. A lot of it is like people just like they heard, because I talk a lot on my YouTube channel about like chronic the for me the story is all the same eventually, but I can see how it's helpful for people to talk from different spaces about it. Like if I just talk from awakening all the time, it alienates like a large group of people that could be helped by it. So
Yeah.
it's often a like interesting um meeting somebody where they're at is like sometimes I'll just kind of let somebody uh kind of express what they want from the session. And when somebody says to me like, look, I want you to help me, um like the one client that I've been able to go the deepest with, like he said to me like, I want you to push me, like I know there's emotions, and that's when I'll be like, okay, look, tell me whatever thought comes up, tell me that. But it does feel, it just obviously I've still got a lot to learn here, but I felt like it's the easiest to do it when I can only really do it when somebody wants that, you know, like where somebody is,
Mm,
it's very difficult to, when somebody's setting clear beliefs about their condition, sometimes you want to challenge that, but if you do it too much, it's just going to like shut them off, so it's like a very
mm,
interesting giving them what they need and
yeah.
acknowledging where they're at, and then testing when to push on that, if it just naturally comes up, I guess.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is like you trust your impulse to like know what's needed in the moment rather than like overstretching someone if they're quite scared or something. You
Yeah.
just listen to the client full on
Yeah.
with an open sense of like yeah, engaging your intuition. Yeah, yeah. I think that's important, I think, rather than just coming in with this like agenda and like this formula approach of like
Yeah.
it's so you really have to feel the person to know where they're at. And it's pretty apparent when that happens, when you're in a
Exactly.
session with someone. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, as exactly said, that's how I approach working with someone, is I'll literally just be like, what, just open up, like whatever. There's no there's I don't come in it with any plan at all, and it's just like talk about whatever you want, and then something will pop up into my mind, say like, okay, this is something that comes to mind about what you're saying, and then sometimes someone
Mm,
will be like, okay, can we do some like sitting together, or it's so dynamic, which is good. It's cool. It's like challenges me, um, and it's
yeah.
so, yeah, it's so
That's cool,
much
man.
just about that. Yeah, but I'm curious about your, because you said you mostly do like somatic work. Did you do like a course or something on that, or do you just, yeah, what's your kind of approach?
No, I didn't actually. A lot of it's just come through like it's like all I care about, you know.
Mm,
So it's like all I've been doing for the past like I don't know, man, like 10 years. It's just like inner
mm,
work and like self-exploration. So I just had confidence within myself to well, I had a lot of doubt at first because I was like, am I
yeah.
qualified enough? Am I all this? And as I just felt into and continued to do the investigations myself, I just realized like I'm actually very good at what I do. Like it's
Mm,
one of my gifts is to help people unpack these areas because I've gone to the depths within myself like over and over again, and I still do,
yeah.
So yeah, I started facilitating people and yeah, I work with all sorts of people like old men sometimes like 70. The oldest I've worked with is like 73, and like I've worked with like some doctors and
Yeah.
female and male and all sorts of stuff. Like it's so much. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's just really like meeting energy as energy, and like no matter what your egoic identity is, it's just energy for me. So like just
Mm,
show up with people. And I have an approach. I address the emotion body. I love to work with people who are interested in awakening because I just resonate with them more, and I think that I'll be able to be of service to them more, and like bring
Yeah.
into these concepts like awareness, resting as awareness, for example, as the basis of the work,
Yeah.
and keeping the context that like we're interested in awakening here and integration, embodied awakening really, and
Yeah.
then so coming through that lens, and then meeting the emotion, um, yeah, and just using skillful inquiries that inspired from like killer bee inquiries and like
Mm,
focusing, um, yeah, and my own
mm,
instinct all comes into it, right? So yeah,
yeah.
that's how I approach it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's very like, so there is like an approach. There's like you could say there's like somewhat of a formula, but it's very intuitive as well. So I don't
Mm,
hold that super rigidly, that approach. I listen to what's needed as well, like you do, you know.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think
yeah,
it is what you say, like having some idea of an approach is also helpful though, because you know, like what are good areas to touch on with someone. You know, if somebody's kind of feeling really lost or they don't know what to do, then often, because I found this in myself, often I'm just holding space for whatever somebody wants to explore. But sometimes giving them something like knowing, let's look into this, let's dig into that. That's often what's needed. You know, it's that kind of push pull, I suppose. Like,
yeah,
okay, let's give space for what you explore, but you know,
yeah,
maybe we're getting a little bit too lost in story here. And that's again where like the
yeah.
willingness to trust yourself is, you know, it can be feel quite scary at first, just from my own experience with this. Is like, who am I to
Oh yeah,
tell?
me too. Yeah,
Yeah, who am I to say what someone should be doing here? And I guess it just comes with experience, you know, like that's what the compassion is, such a necessary foundation, because once you're feeling in with somebody, then I suppose you can kind of, you know, point them around and that kind of stuff. But if you don't have that willingness to feel in, then um, that's where the mistakes happen, I suppose. That's like where that fear comes from. But it's like once you know you're feeding
mm.
into it with someone, then it's like, okay, that doubt isn't necessary or something like that. um
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
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 Awesome. Yeah, just the trust deepens, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Gets deeper
exactly.
and deeper.
Yeah, exactly. It's just that trust. It's like, okay, this is actually, like, for me, that's what gets so interesting, is like I actually have no clue, like when I meet somebody, and like just it could be like a random encounter, and like I think Frank, it's said Frank Yang, you know, Frank. um
Yeah, I love Frank. Yeah, he's awesome.
yeah, he's amazing. um
What is he? Kundalini, bro, or no, uh,
Infinite, bro.
what's he call himself? Infinite, bro. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
man, he's such a funny dude.
Yeah, so he's such inspiration as well. um
Mm.
he said something somewhere of like, you just don't even understand the like karmic mechanism of what's like going on when somebody does something and then you do something, and it's like that just becomes clearer and clearer with me. Like it seems like just a chance encounter, like someone will say something and then, you know, you respond, and then like that maybe wasn't a very important thing on somebody's part, and it just felt like nothing really. Just like I know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
like you don't even know
yeah, and that
what the fuck you're
prajna
doing.
wisdom, that
Yeah.
deep instinct.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 totally. Yeah, that's like prajna wisdom, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's like an intelligence that's impersonal. It's not really you doing it, really. It's just and that comes from a deep trust in
Yeah.
that, you know, and then through that immersion, presence, knowing the signature of presence, and being able to feel the whole environment, and like we were talking about
Mm,
before, that leadership, and like not neglect anything, like welcome it all in, you know.
mm,
So yeah.
yeah.
Oh man, look, this has been awesome. I've probably got to wrap this up because
Yeah.
I've kicked my partner out of the apartment, and it's like dinner time. So
Nah,
uh,
all good.
yeah, I thought
I
yeah,
was
yeah.
feeling we was going to check in with you about time. So, um, yeah, no, it's been such a
Yeah, yeah.
fun
It's
chat.
probably a good time to wrap up for now, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
amazing.
dude, so good to meet you. I'm glad you reached out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Thanks.
really glad you reached out.
Thanks so much for, yeah, being open to the chat. It's it's so enjoyable, like engaging with other people who've been down the same path, because for me, like I
Mm.
haven't engaged with a lot of other people that are like talking about this and that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of fun, like just being able to, you know, engage.
Yeah, yeah. I see
Yeah.
so many parallels in my experience, and there's like other humans out there that are doing this weird, wacky shit like I am. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, because it is such a like, you know, a completely different route to take. So it's cool to like most humans can probably relate with somebody else that's like, you know, studying to be a doctor. And it's like, oh, you can relate with other people that are studying to be a doctor or something,
yeah,
where it's like, okay, you want to talk about non-duality and that kind of shit online. Well, it's a much smaller crowd.
yeah. Awakening, you're like that guy at the party standing in the corner with the cup, drinking like Kundalini juice, and like, why won't they talk to me?
Anybody want shrooms?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Still vibing, marijuana's. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's quite a unique path, but it's for some of us it's the only thing that seems to make sense, I suppose.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's definitely my
Yeah.
calling. Like I just, yeah,
Yeah.
feels so right for now.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Let's see where we end up.
Yeah, maybe maybe I'll just like be totally different 10 years from now, and that's totally fine too. You know,
Yeah,
this is just where I'm
exactly.
at.
It's just
Yeah.
what's here now. Yeah, well, yeah, definitely keep in touch. Like it will be cool to yeah, keep in keep
Yeah.
seeing keep engaging on the path. Yeah.